I first felt it the night the light above the garage flickered, just once, a trembling blink that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did, because in that split second of darkness, I caught my own reflection in the kitchen window, 29, tired and pretending I was fine. My name is Mira, and that night, for the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. It had been a long evening at my parents' place, the kind that looks normal from the outside. My mom layering lasagna like she was building a fortress, my brother scrolling through his phone, my dad bragging loudly about quarterly projections as if the house were a boardroom. I sat at the counter picking at a chipped corner of the table, listening, smiling when expected. We'd gone through these motions so many times they had worn grooves into us. Dad didn't ask about my day. He never did. If I ever offered details, he let them fall like crumbs he wouldn't bother sweeping. Tonight was no different. He talked, and I nodded, and the hours cracked quietly around us. I should have gone home earlier, but I stayed. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe because I still wanted to believe they saw value in what I was building, even if they laughed. The laughter had started months ago, after I quit my job to build small indie games and interactive narratives online. I knew what they thought, that it was childish, unstable, unserious. A hobby, Dad had called it, not a real path. Mom tried to soften it, but even her attempts sounded like apologies on my behalf. And my brother, he just smirked, the kind of smirk you only learn after years of watching Dad dismiss people for a living. Tonight was supposed to be normal, quiet, predictable. But then the lasagna hit the table, and everything tilted. So, Dad said, dropping into his seat like a king claiming his throne, "Mira, when are you planning to get a proper job again?" He asked it casually, slicing into his food like he wasn't slicing into me. I forced a smile. "Dad, the game's doing well. I told you. I'm building something real." "A game," he repeated, as if tasting something sour. "You're almost 30. At some point, you have to stop pretending that counts as work." My brother snorted into his water. Mom sighed in that gentle, exhausted way of hers that always made me feel like my existence required her forgiveness. I kept my voice even. "It counts. I promise you it counts." Dad waved a hand. "Until you're living in our basement, begging for rent money. You're smart, Mira, but you're not being serious with your life." I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. I'd had this argument 100 times. I knew all roles by heart. Dad as the blunt realist, Mom as the reluctant buffer, my brother as the audience member who found it all entertaining. And me, quiet, patient, rational, explaining myself in circles. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I just looked down at my plate and kept breathing. That's the thing about being underestimated for so long. You learn to fold the anger into small, manageable shapes. The conversation drifted back to Dad's world. Investors, expansion, the upcoming sale of his company. He was proud of that one. He'd been bragging for weeks about the mystery buyer who made the highest offer. "Smart people," he kept saying. "Visionaries. People who understand real business. People like him, he meant. Not like me." After dinner, I helped Mom clean the kitchen. She didn't ask if I was okay, but her hand lingered a second too long on my arm as she took a plate from me. That was her version of concern. Silent, soft and heavy. Dad was in the living room, pouring another drink when I left. He didn't look up. My brother yelled a sarcastic, "Don't work too hard," after me. I pretended not to hear. Outside, the air felt colder than it had any right to be. I walked to my car, keys in hand, and that's when the garage light flickered, the same bulb that had stayed steady for 15 years. I glanced back instinctively, and that reflection in the window. God. It felt like looking at someone mid-exit, halfway between who they'd been told to be and who they were quietly becoming. I got in the car and sat for a minute, hands on the wheel, headlights off. My phone buzzed with a notification. Then another. Then 3 more. I frowned and unlocked it. Sales dashboard. My heart thudded. The number on the screen wasn't just higher than usual. It was astronomical. I blinked hard. Refresh. Same number. I checked my inbox. 50 new messages. Then 100. Then 200. New subscribers. New patrons. A collaboration request from a studio I admired. A licensing inquiry from someone big. someone whose name made my breath hitch. Something had happened. I scrolled faster, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. Someone massive must have spotlighted my game. A review. A feature. A viral clip. I jumped through tabs, searching. My heart beat, so loud it drowned out the quiet street. Then I opened the message that stopped everything. It was a single sentence from a sender I didn't recognize. "We need to talk about your narrative engine." And below it a signature. A name I knew. A name my father idolized. And the name of the company, buying his. My throat tightened. My vision narrowed. The light above the garage flickered again. Another small, trembling blink. And suddenly, something inside me cracked open, clear and cold. Because in that moment, I realized something I couldn't unrealize. My family had no idea who they were laughing at. And I had no idea just how big the door in front of me had just opened. I didn't sleep that night. I don't even think I blinked for more than a second at a time. I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open, the glow washing over my room like a low-burning fire. That message kept replaying in my head. Those 11 words, that name beneath them, the weight of it all pressing against my ribs. I reread the email every few minutes, just to make sure I hadn't hallucinated it. By 3 a.m., I knew I had to reply. My hands shook as I typed, short and professional. I hit send before I lost courage. The reply came 12 minutes later. He wanted to talk the next morning. By the time the sun rose, my body felt hollow, like I'd burned through something important just staying awake. But I was there, sitting at my tiny desk, headphones on, when the video call connected. "Good morning, Mira," he said, in the kind of calm voice that people only earn after decades of being listened to. He wasn't flashy, not like my father imagined powerful men should be. Just steady, direct, and that somehow made him feel even bigger. I swallowed. "Morning. Thanks for reaching out. I'll be honest with you," he said, leaning back slightly. "I've been watching your work for a while now." That sentence alone almost knocked the air out of me. Watching my work. Me. The girl whose family still treated her like a kid playing with crayons. "You built your engine from scratch?" he asked. I nodded. "And the branching logic system, did you design that alone?" "I did." My voice barely made it past my throat. "It was just me." He smiled like that impressed him more than he expected. "Good. Because what you created, it's the cleanest adaptive dialogue system I've seen in years. Elegant, even. Elegant. Nobody had ever used that word for my work, least of all someone with his reach." He went on, explaining how he'd found my game through a developer forum, how he'd quietly tested it himself, how he saw potential in the mechanics that, in his words, other studios weren't smart enough to notice. He wanted to talk licensing, long-term collaboration, expansion into story-driven VR. I kept nodding, trying not to let the shock pull me under. But then, right when I could finally breathe, he mentioned the sale. "My company's acquisition has been complicated," he said. "Some people are resisting changes. But when the deal closes, I'll have room to greenlight new projects. Yours being one of them." I froze. "My father's company," I said slowly. "That's the one being acquired." His brows lifted slightly. "Ah, yes. I didn't realize the connection when we scheduled this call. Small world. Small. Right. Except it didn't feel small at all. It felt like a hallway stretching open in front of me, every door I'd been shut out of suddenly swinging wide. "Does he know who's buying it?" I asked. "Not yet," he said with a hint of dry amusement. "He'll know soon enough." My pulse thudded. I thanked him, promised to send documentation, and ended the call. The moment the screen went dark, I let out a sound, half laugh, half disbelief, before slumping back into my chair. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to swallow everything at once. But as the adrenaline faded, something deeper took its place. Something quieter, heavier. It wasn't joy, though there was some of that. It wasn't pride, though I felt that too. It was memory. Because there was a reason their laughter had cut so deep. A reason every dismissal felt like it lived under my skin. It started years ago, long before my game, long before I chose this path. I was 16 the night Dad found one of my early projects on the family computer. It was messy and weird. A little story game I'd stitched together with freeware tools because I didn't know what I was doing yet. I'd stayed up all night building it, heart racing with that electric kind of excitement only teenagers have when creativity feels like a secret door only you can see. When he opened it, I thought, just for a moment, that he might be proud. Instead, he laughed. Not a soft chuckle. A deep, rolling laugh that echoed down the hallway. He called my mom over. Then my brother. They all watched the screen while I stood behind them, shrinking with every second. "What is this supposed to be?" Dad asked. "It's a game," I whispered. He shook his head. "This isn't a game. This is nonsense. Who would ever pay for this?" Mom tried to hush him. "She's just experimenting." "Exactly," Dad said. "Playtime. She's smart enough to do real work. Not this." I still remember the heat in my face, the way my throat tightened, how I held that shame for weeks, maybe years. I deleted the game the next morning. For a while, I even believed him. That memory resurfaced now, sharper than it had been in years. It hurt, but it also steadied me, because the girl I'd been then would never have imagined sitting in a call with a man who wanted to license her engine. She would never have imagined being sought after. She would never have imagined being needed. And she definitely wouldn't have imagined this collision, this sudden crossroad between my world and his. I closed the laptop gently, like it might break if I touched it wrong. The house was silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm you didn't notice until it was already passing. By afternoon, I decided to clear my head with a walk. My apartment was just a few blocks from the city park, and I followed the path I always took, the path with the crooked lamppost and the old oak tree that looked like it was holding its breath. The air was cool, crisp enough to wake me up. I walked until the noise in my chest softened. On the way back, I stopped at my mailbox, flipping through letters without really seeing them. But then one envelope made me pause. No return address. Thick paper. My name printed in clean block letters. When I opened it, a small metal card slid out, sleek, matte black, with an engraved logo. The same logo as the company buying my father's. No note. No instructions. Just that card. I held it up to the light, and a tiny etched line caught my eye. A serial number. I tilted it again. A key code. Barely visible unless you knew where to look. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't warm either. It was intentional. Like someone had placed it directly in my path. But why send it to me? Why not through email? Why a physical object? A small chill slid down my spine. Not fear exactly. More like a whisper that something was shifting beneath the surface. I looked around the quiet hallway. No footsteps. No open doors. Just me and that card pressing cold against my palm. I slipped it into my pocket and hurried upstairs, my heartbeat picking up with each step. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and sat on the couch, staring at the card resting on my knee. This wasn't random. Someone wanted me to have it. Someone who knew the connection. Someone who understood this was more than business. That card felt like a breadcrumb, small but deliberate, and something in me recognized the weight of it, the beginning of a thread pulling taut. I placed it on the table, took a step back, and felt a slow crawling awareness rise in my chest. Because I didn't know exactly what the card meant yet. But I knew, with the same bone-deep certainty I'd felt the night the garage light flickered, that this wasn't just good news or opportunity. It was something else. Something bigger. Something my father would never see coming. And as the room settled into a thick, humming quiet around me, I realized I didn't just have a chance. I had a truth forming under my feet, rising like a tide. And whatever came next, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Not after this. Not after everything. The air felt different now, dense, expectant, like the walls were listening. And that's when it hit me. The ground beneath this family was beginning to shift. And I was the one holding the first fault line. I stared at that metal card for hours, like it might whisper its purpose if I just looked long enough. By evening, my thoughts were circling too tight, too loud. So I opened my laptop again, pushed aside the nervous tremor in my hands, and focused on something concrete. Documentation, code snippets, everything the studio had asked for. But before I could finish, another email appeared. Short, clipped, unmistakably intentional. Use the card tomorrow. Noon. Lobby. No signature this time. But the email domain told me enough. Internal. Direct. Someone very high up. I should have felt nervous. Maybe I did. But beneath that, running quiet and steady, was something else entirely, an awareness that whatever waited behind this invitation wasn't an accident. It was the breadcrumb I'd been following without realizing. So at 11:45 the next morning, I stood in front of a skyscraper, so polished it looked like a blade. My father had spoken about this building with awe for years. I used to half listen, half dream while he talked, imagining what it'd feel like to step inside a place built for other people, people whose work mattered. Now I was one of them. Inside the lobby, security was tight. A guard held out a hand before I even reached the desk. ID. I slid the metal card into his palm. His brows lifted a millimeter. Then he stepped aside. Go ahead, Miss Hale. Hale. My last name. Spoken with respect. The elevator recognized the card, too. It carried me to the 40th floor, doors opening into a quiet hallway washed in soft light. A single glass door stood at the end, frosted with patterns that looked like branching story nodes, little forks and choices spreading outward like roots. I paused, steadying myself, then pushed the door open. 2 people were waiting. One was the studio head, the man from the video call. He gave me a small nod, welcoming but observant. The other was a woman around my age, maybe a little older. She wore a dark suit and the kind of expression that suggested she'd done the impossible before breakfast. You must be Mira, she said, stepping forward. I'm Lena. Her handshake was firm, controlled, precise. I'm head of strategic integration. I blinked. Integration of? Companies, she said simply. Including the one we're about to finalize. My father's. The world narrowed, not painfully, but sharply, like a lens snapping into focus. They led me into a conference room overlooking the city. Coffee already waited at the table. Not generic catering coffee, but something stronger, richer. The kind of coffee people reserve for those they wanted wide awake. The studio head sat across from me. Lena remained standing for a moment, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe. Calculation. Mira, he said gently, we didn't bring you here for a tour. My stomach tightened. Okay. We brought you here because of your engine. And because of your father's company. The air in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough. Lena took a seat at last, folding her hands. We know the relationship is strained. He touched my cheeks. That's an understatement. I'm sure, she said. But what we need to discuss isn't personal. Not really. Still, the studio head said, it affects you. Directly. He slid a folder across the table. Thick. Heavy. I opened it, expecting contracts or proposals. But instead, I found a series of documents stamped with red annotations. Financial reports. Internal emails, acquisition notes, and projections, so many projections, about the company my father ran. Only they didn't look good. The numbers were off, twisted in ways that felt wrong the moment I saw them. My father's company wasn't stable. It wasn't growing. It wasn't thriving like he always claimed. It was collapsing. Quietly, steadily, and so completely that I felt a cold shock crawl through my fingers as I held the pages. I thought, my voice wavered. He's been bragging about record profits. About expansion. Lena lifted an eyebrow. He lied. The word landed harder than any number on the page. He's been inflating performance for 2 years, the studio head said. Hiding operational failures. Covering losses with aggressive short-term contracts that won't sustain another quarter. I swallowed, throat tight. Why wouldn't the buyers know that? We do, he said. That's why we're buying it. For the assets, not the leadership. The room tilted slightly, not enough to disorient me, but enough to push a tremor under my skin. And where do I fit into this? I asked. Lena leaned forward. Your engine changes the value calculus. With it, we have the ability to restructure post-acquisition in a way that frees us from certain liabilities. Liabilities. She meant people. She meant my father. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. You're saying, after the acquisition, he won't remain in leadership, she said bluntly. Not after what's been uncovered. Not after what we know. My breath stilled. All those years he talked down to me, dismissed my work, laughed at my ambitions. He had no idea the ground under him was already breaking. And the bridge I'd built in secret, line of code by line of code, was extending directly into the heart of the company he'd worshipped like a god. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Lena pushed a tablet toward me. On the screen was a contract, not long but dense. Licensing terms, compensation, creative control, rights of expansion. The numbers made my head spin. "This," she said softly, "is your leverage. You built something we need, something that changes everything. And you get to decide how it's used during the transition." I stared at her. "Are you asking me to help remove him?" "No," she said. "We're telling you that it will happen regardless. But if you agree to work with us, you'll help shape the future afterward. You won't just be part of the company we're building, you'll influence the entire direction of the division." My pulse hammered. All my life, my father had insisted I knew nothing about real business. And here I was, holding a document that placed me at the center of the largest decision his company would ever face. My chest tightened for a different reason this time. Not fear. Not anger. Something like release. I signed. The room exhaled with me. When I left the building, the sun felt brighter. Sharper. Like it was lighting a path I didn't know I'd been walking for years. But the day wasn't over. By the time I drove to my parents' house that evening, everything felt different. The sky was low and gray, heavy with a quiet that mirrored something in my chest. I sat in the car for a long minute, rehearsing what I might say. I didn't need revenge. The truth was already enough. When I finally went inside, Dad was in his office, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't see me at first. His face was red, tense. His voice sharp. "I don't understand," he snapped. "They said the deal was clean. They said leadership would remain intact." He stopped, turned, saw me. His expression twisted. Confusion first, then frustration, then something like suspicion creeping into the edges of his eyes. "Mira, what are you doing here?" I didn't step into the room. "I needed to talk to you." "Can it wait?" he snapped. "I'm in the middle of something serious." I met his eyes. "I know." He froze at the tone in my voice. Really froze. "What do you know?" he asked slowly. This was the moment, the crack widening, the truth pushing through. I took a breath. "I had a meeting today. With the buyers." His face darkened. "What buyers?" "The ones acquiring your company." He stepped closer. "Why the hell would you have any reason to meet with them?" "Because," I said softly, "they reached out to me. About my work." He blinked. "Your little game." "Yes," I said. "My engine. My code. The work you said wasn't real. The work you laughed at." His jaw flexed. "Mira, this isn't." "They want to use it," I said, cutting him off for the first time in my life. "And because of that, I had the right to see the acquisition documents." His face went still, blank in the most dangerous way. "And I know," I whispered, "what you've been hiding." A muscle near his temple twitched. "You don't understand," he said. "You don't know what pressure looks like. You don't know what it takes to keep a company afloat." "Then you should have asked for help," I said. "You should have admitted you were struggling. Instead, you lied. To them. To Mom. To us. To yourself." He stepped toward me, voice rising. "You think any of this is your place? You think you're part of this?" "I am," I said calmly. "Whether you like it or not." His breath caught. What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that the transition plan is set. You won't be CEO after the acquisition closes." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked small, so small I barely recognized him. You knew," he whispered. "Yes. You let this happen." "I didn't let anything happen," I said. "I just stopped pretending I had no power." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as his daughter, not as a child to correct, but as someone who existed outside of him, someone he couldn't control. "You did this," he said, voice shaking now. "You betrayed me." "No," I said. "You just never expected I could stand without you." He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Not anger. Not denial. Nothing. Mom stepped quietly into the hallway then, worry etched across her face. She probably heard everything. "Mira," she whispered. "Is this true?" I nodded. She didn't look angry. Or shocked. She looked relieved. Dad sank into his chair, one hand pressed over his mouth. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt steady, for the first time in years. I'm leaving, I said softly. I just wanted you to hear it from me. Neither of them spoke. I walked out of the house, the door clicking shut behind me. The night air felt colder than before, but cleaner too, like a storm had finally passed. In my car, the silence was thick but gentle. I rested my head against the seat and exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a decade. Then I looked straight into the rearview mirror, the closest thing I had to an audience, and said quietly, the way I would to the people who'd been following my story online. If you've come this far with me, thank you. And if you want to keep walking with me through whatever comes next, hit like, hit subscribe, and stay with me. Because this isn't the end. Not even close. I paused, letting the moment settle. Storms leave a strange kind of quiet behind. Not empty, just clear. And sometimes, in that quiet, you finally hear your own voice again. Sometimes, you finally realize the roots you thought were holding you down were just showing you where to grow. I turned the key, the engine humming alive beneath me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.